Hello everyone and welcome back. And welcome to this last lecture in my series on chaos theory. Now we've seen a lot as we've walked through this series, right? We have seen primarily that symbolic dynamics is a very effective way of capturing chaos. We've also seen that one dimension is all you need to get really complex stuff. Now, what we've been doing in the past few lectures is looking at what can happen in higher dimensions. Now, we've seen things like the horseshoe map that basically extends our notion of symbolic dynamics to backwards and forwards, to diffeomorphism, something we didn't have in one dimension. Now, what I would like to do to conclude this series is look at another kind of bifurcation that happens only in 2 and higher dimensions. Now, we are going to do this primarily by example, but know that there are rigorous theory that will sit underneath this thing that I will communicate to you as we go forward. In particular, that rigorous theory is known as the normal form. Again, if you've been following my work, if you've been watching my YouTube videos, then you know that I love to talk about normal forms. And in particular, what we are going to do in this is primarily analyze this bifurcation through its normal form. So let's just dig in. Let's have a little bit of fun. Let's start by analyzing this two-dimensional mapping, okay? F sub lambda, and let's not use the blue. Let's switch over. Let's use the pink here. XY, two-dimensional mapping here. And this thing is going to take a point in two-dimensional space, and it is going to map it forward to another thing, g of xy, which is a scalar map. I'll give it to you in a second. And then it's going to multiply by a matrix. I'm going to say cos of alpha. Let's put minus sine of alpha. And then sine of alpha. And cos of alpha. And then xy. Okay? And in particular, my g function is going to look like this. My g sub lambda of xy is going to be a linear term at the beginning, a bifurcation parameter lambda, and then maybe a little tuning parameter beta, and then we're going to put x squared plus y squared. Okay? So again, if you are coming at this from continuous time dynamical systems, this should look like something you're probably used to. This is effectively the Hopf bifurcation normal form, just in discrete time formulation. Now we're going to assume at least that beta is non-zero to make this thing interesting, so that it is not a linear mapping. And the best way it turns out to analyze this thing is to convert to polar. So convert to polar coordinates. And again, you're probably noticing a theme that this is the same thing that we analyze the Hopf bifurcation in continuous time according to as well, right? Polar just becomes this sort of natural setting. And in particular, the mapping now becomes f of r theta is equal to, and this becomes lambda r plus beta r cubed, and theta plus alpha. Now, what you can see here is that this thing has completely decoupled. There is a radial component and a phase component. In particular, the phase oscillator here, or the phase component, is just a uniform shift along the mapping, right? You're sort of just taking every single phase and pushing it forward by an angle of alpha every single time. That angle of alpha was determined by the original constraints on the system here. And then what we can see is that there is a fixed point in R. So let's say fixed point in R, which is R is equal to the square root of 1 minus lambda over beta. And so what does this actually represent? This is an invariant circle in the xy plane. Okay, and you can also check that this thing for beta negative is going to be repelling. So this beta negative implies that lambda has to be positive, whereas beta positive implies that lambda has to be negative. Again, if you're coming at this from continuous time dynamical systems, you know that this describes two different settings. Those settings are referred to as super and subcritical bifurcations. In this case, these things are what's called a Neimark-Sacker bifurcation. Now, sometimes people in the discipline of discrete time dynamical system like to make the link to Hopf bifurcations. Sometimes you'll just hear people call these things Hopf bifurcations themselves. But take a look at what actually happens here, okay? The linearization, right? The linearization about 0, 0 is this matrix. Lambda cos alpha minus lambda sine alpha, lambda sine alpha, and lambda cos alpha, right? And so assuming alpha is not 0 or pi, what are the eigenvalues of this thing? These eigenvalues are they are complex conjugates at the angle alpha on the unit circle in the complex plane when alpha is equal to, or when lambda is equal to 1. So for example, maybe you have eigenvalues that are complex conjugates that right here, and by increasing alpha across 1, you are pulling those eigenvalues outside of the unit circle in the complex plane, okay? So if you take a look at the eigenvalues of this thing, now what you are doing by doing this at alpha equal to 1, this thing is not hyperbolic, right? So non-hyperbolic at lambda equal to 1. When lambda is less than 1, when lambda is bigger than 1, this thing is hyperbolic. You can apply the stable manifold theorem, all of those results from the previous lecture. But when alpha is equal to 1, there is no hyperbolicity. Okay, now let's connect that back to what we just saw here. What we see is that as alpha crosses 1, sorry, these numbers should be 1, not 0, for alpha less than 1 and alpha bigger than 1. As alpha crosses 1, you get an invariant circle that blows off of this thing. In particular, the dynamics on the circle are just this uniform shift along this thing, okay? And so what do the dynamics of this actually look like? Well, let's do the beta less than 0 case. And let's assume lambda is larger than 1. In this case, what you get is a nice invariant circle where the dynamics on this thing are just pushing you forward by an angle of alpha every single time. So uniform movement along this guy, all right? And what happens if you are off of it? Well, you are just going to spiral out towards that invariant circle, okay? So it's a little bit harder to draw in continuous time, or sorry, in discrete time, but effectively you get a stable invariant circle. So stable invariant curve, invariant closed curve actually. In my case, it's a perfect circle, but in other cases, it's diffeomorphic to a circle. And in the other situation, when beta is greater than 0 and lambda is less than 1, you get an unstable invariant curve, invariant closed curve. And so what you can see here is that this Neimark-Sacker bifurcation in a discrete time dynamical system gives you something similar to what you got with a Hopf bifurcation in continuous time. You got an invariant closed curve. The difference is that in continuous time, you just run around that closed curve, right? It's just a periodic solution. You move through every single point on there. In this case, now you are hopping along that invariant curve. And in particular, I want you to notice that the movement along the invariant curve is determined by the eigenvalues, or the angle of the eigenvalues, right? This alpha angle right here. This is determined by the angle of these eigenvalues, and that will tell you how much of a shift you are going through, okay? Now, take a look at this. If alpha is equal to 0, that tells you there's no shifting on this. And effectively what you get is a saddle node bifurcation. If alpha is equal to -1, you are just flipping the entire circle, and you basically get like this sort of period doubling type thing. Now the real question is, when you are dealing with sort of real mappings, right? So this is an idealized map. It's actually a version of a normal form. You should expect to get higher order terms in the g function here. So let's look at another example where things get a little funkier. Okay? So here's an example. Let's put it in polar form right off the bat so we can just kind of analyze it. In my case, let's keep the first part because we understand the radial part. That's the part that gives us the invariant circle. But let's look at more complicated dynamics on the circle. So let's say there's a nu, and let's put epsilon sine of theta. Now this is something we've seen before, right? This is what gave us the devil's staircase. And here now, we still have an invariant circle. So lambda crossing 1, gives an invariant circle, right? And I'm purposely being vague about crossing in which direction because that will determine the value of b. But on the invariant circle, so an invariant circle, the dynamics are really complicated, right? You get this theta n plus 1 is theta n plus nu plus epsilon sine of theta n. And we've already seen this guy can be very, very hard to work with. So for example, if you have nu is equal to, let's say it is some 2 pi over k for k an integer. In fact, we'll say a non-zero, non-negative integer, for example. Then what you will expect is that for small epsilon, remember we did this with the devil's staircase and all this kind of stuff, that for small epsilon, you will have a 2 period k points here, a stable and an unstable point. You get a Morse-Smale diffeomorphism, right? However, if this thing is irrational, things get very, very complicated, right? Because you can, as epsilon increases, you can fall in and out of Arnold tongues. And so what this tells us is that higher order terms really, really, really matter, right? In particular, what we have to do whenever we look at the normal form for this thing is we have to be careful about these eigenvalues that come out of your linearized matrix. And where they cross the unit circle really determines what the normal form will look like. And what the normal form looks like determines how complex the dynamics will be, right? Because in this case, we can see that at least for small epsilon, we are going to get ourselves in a nice position where we just have attracting periodic points on this invariant circle, attracting and repelling in that case. However, if this thing was, again, irrational, then epsilon equal to 0 gives us just an irrational rotation around the circle, something like what we would have had here. But perturbing in epsilon, again, could put us into a very complicated situation where we could be falling in and out of Arnold tongues. And in this case, you know, this term on the back end here is just a proxy for any really complicated nonlinear term that gets stuck on the end. And so the real difference, okay, the real difference between a Hopf bifurcation in continuous time and a Hopf bifurcation in discrete time is that you have to be very careful in discrete time. Dynamics will change depending on how the eigenvalues cross, and the normal forms will change. However, in continuous time, it's always the same thing. You are always just getting a closed curve that's a solution. You traverse every single point on it. The eigenvalues in that case just tell you the period approximately that you move around that thing. However, what these have in common is that the Neimark-Sacker bifurcation, or the Hopf bifurcation in discrete time, leads to a closed invariant curve. Same thing that we had whenever we had a Hopf bifurcation in continuous time. And that means that the real difference is really just the circle map that defines the flow or the movement on the circle. And again, if you followed my lecture series on continuous time dynamical systems, I did a couple lectures on flows on the circle. And we said that they're not really that interesting. You just sort of flow around them, or you flow into a fixed point, right? Nothing else happens. Here, what we've seen already in 1D dynamical systems for maps on the circle is that dynamics on the circle can be really complicated. And in particular, that's when we started talking about all this fractal structure, the Cantor function, when we talked about rotation number and Arnold tongues, and stuff gets really complicated. So what is it that I'm trying to tell you? It's kind of the same, but it's nuanced, right? But the fact of the matter is here, just like in continuous time dynamical systems, 2D opens up the possibility for another kind of bifurcation, the Hopf bifurcation. Now, in discrete time, we give it its own name sometimes. We call it the Neimark-Sacker bifurcation, just so it's distinguished. And what we see here is that it's kind of the same, but has a little bit more complexity on top of it. So with that being said, thank you all very much for listening. I really appreciate you watching along with this and learning chaotic dynamical systems with me. In the next series that will follow, I'm going to dedicate a small mini-series, maybe about 10 lectures, just to complex dynamics. And this will include some really phenomenal pictures at the very least, when we start talking about Julia sets, right? And the Mandelbrot set, and all these beautiful fractals that people love to talk about when they think about chaos theory. So look forward to that. That will be coming shortly after the conclusion of this lecture series. Thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you in the next series.